I was here 2 years ago when we worked on spreading innovation about Europe, about telling you how we will give incentives for cities and through the European Capital of Innovation Awards. And then we decided to go on this adventure of the Knowledge Exchange platform. And I said then to you that I think and I deeply believe that the power in the world is shifting from nations to cities. And the clear forward-looking messages and opinions that have come from this committee have proven that we were right. The power is really shifting. And today, I'm very happy to be here to discuss this opinion that was prepared by Mr. Christophe Clergeau, on the local and regional dimension of Horizon 2020 and the new framework program for research and innovation. This is very timely, as we've just kicked off our discussions, and Marco was just reminding us that last week we had the so-called Lamy report. And the opinion that is being discussed today is pretty much in line with the ideas that come also from that independent body that was led by Pascal Lamy. First, let me tell you why I did invite Pascal Lamy, because he's not a scientist. He's just, I think, one of the visionaries of Europe. And I think that the reason that we did that was that we need this subject of research and innovation to be at the level of the heads of state and the heads of government. And I think that in your opinion, Mr. Clergeau, you say that you want or you think that we have to return to innovation and research as one of the top priorities of the future of Europe. And I could not agree more. I'm very sad to see that sometimes you look at the world and you see President Xi Jinping from China talking about science and innovation, but you don't see a lot of leaders in Europe talking about science and innovation. So I agree with you that your call is right. Research, science, and innovation have to be at the top in the priorities of Europe. I also strongly agree when you say that we need to consider a broad assessment of impact. And impact of what is not just impact of selling products, it's the impact of the scientific knowledge. What's the impact of that knowledge in our daily lives? A couple of great Nobel Prizes, and we were talking about the future and talking about the fact that the impact is about every piece of data that even when we are wrong, will create the future. And so that impact is the impact of the daily lives of people, of all the information that we have today, but it's not talking to each other. Furthermore, I'm pleased to see that you encourage this idea of the mission-based approach for our funding. And I think that's one of the major points that we also see in the Lamy report. But you have also more critical points, and you say that you're disappointed regarding the low success rate of Horizon 2020. And here I have to tell you, I mean, I think there's just one way to change that. If we want to be effective, is to have more money for science and innovation in Europe. The Lamy report calls for a doubling of the budget. And that's an independent view. The Parliament talks about 120 billion euros. And I think that we all agree that what we have is not enough. And if we don't do more, this low success rate will be there. So in this context, I wanted to share with you this afternoon three simple thoughts. The first one about the role of innovation in regions and what I've been thinking about it lately. Secondly, how can we improve the European programs to strengthen this regional side of innovation and science? And third, how can we include more regions in the design of these programs, and why do I think that's important for innovation in science? But let's start by the first point, which is the position of regions today towards science and innovation. I think there was a time where regions and the mindset of regions were about geography. And I think that we have to change that mindset, that regions are not about geography. Regions are about cooperating with other regions to get better results. And that is because I think that if you look at globalization, globalization increased the need for local action. And it's kind of contradictory, right? Because you think about globalization as something that is not local, but local issues have become global, but global issues have become more local, and you are the drivers of that. So I believe that the first part is that if you want to modernize your regional economies, you should be the ones interested in being firmly rooted in research and innovation, because that's the only future we have. You know, there's not a lot of ways today is that you can change the world. I mean, you can basically work more or be paid less, have cheaper prices, but that's not the way Europe wants to go. Europe wants to have a better condition for their citizens, and we want to have the ability to pay more. And for that, you just can pay more if you have better products, if you have better science. And I think that these innovation-led industries are and will be more and more the motor of the creation of new jobs and where the old jobs become obsolete. So we have to think about how can the regions be the engine of that. And regions are, by definition, that engine. Because when you look at the world today, you think about all these physical borders of nations. They don't count anymore because there's nothing that physical borders can do. There's more in common in two regions that are from different countries but are side to side than eventually in regions of the same country that are far apart. So I think that you have to use your leverage as regional players, as the link in between the European Union and innovation and the regions. Second, I think that we have to think how can we improve our programs. And let me tell you, if there's something that I'm very proud of my 2 years and a half, is a very simple thing. Because I think that in politics, sometimes it's the very simple ideas that get us to the better and the best results. When I decided with my colleague Corina Crezzo that we had to do something about the way structural funds and Horizon 2020 work, we decided that things were not working. And we created this idea of the seals of excellence. And the seals of excellence were about that. Were about telling our departments, telling our people that we want them to work together. That the way we were doing so far separately in between this division, in between structural funds and Horizon 2020 was not good enough. So today I can tell you that we have more than 6,500 of these seals of excellence. That we have funded through the structural funds more than 258 projects that we couldn't fund in Horizon 2020 because we didn't have enough money. And I think that was a great example. But it's still very short for what I wanted to do. It's still very short that the only way we got to work together was about imposing a certificate that is signed by myself and my colleague, telling people, look, this project went to the filter of Horizon 2020, is very good, you should look at it and you should fund it. And I think that the Lamy report brings that very well when they put that that's one of the biggest flaws we have today. We are not working together in between the structural funds and Horizon 2020, and we have to do something about it more than the seal of excellence. And I think that that gets me to one very important point, which I've discussed so at length with the group of Lamy, is that the only way we can get is that if we align our agendas in between the structural funds and Horizon 2020. And I think we did very well with the smart specialization strategy. I think the smart specialization strategy is the very beginning of it. And I know that we've put more than 40 billion euros in the structural funds onto the smart specialization strategy. But I think that there's much more to do. And that's where I get to the co-creation. We have to be able to co-create with the structural funds and design mutually what we want for innovation. Probably one of the trips that I really liked in this tenure of mine was to go to Romania, where I visited the ELI, the Extreme Light Infrastructure. So imagine how you can, in between 3 countries, Hungary, the Czech Republic and Romania, to put together a project that is in between 3 countries and put structural funds and Horizon 2020 and Framework Program 7. And I think that that project is an example that if you start by the beginning, if you start designing together with the structural funds, then you can achieve a result. And I think that what I would like to see would be more of these projects like ELI in Romania, Czech Republic and Hungary, because they are the ones where you basically get it right in terms of the design. Sometimes we get it wrong when we just do the structural funds in one side, we put the money, and then we'll see what are the Horizon 2020, what are the science projects that make sense for that infrastructure. But then it's too late, right? We have to do it from the beginning. And third, I will really want to go to my last point, which is how to involve you in the design of the future research and innovation programs. But let me tell you a little bit what came out of the Lamy report, because I think can help us on defining how can you be more part of it. The Lamy report was very simple. 11 recommendations telling us, just for me, 3 very simple things. One, that we are doing everything right in terms of fundamental research. And for those that know what you're doing in fundamental research, you know that every part of the world wants to be part of the European Research Council. And I think that this year when I was at the Nobel Prize ceremony, and you see a man like Ben Feringa, the Dutch Nobel Prize, or Jean-Pierre Sauvage, the French Nobel Prize, saying that without the European Research Council, without the European Union money, they would not ever got to be Nobel Prizes. And you know what? Just because they said it, it's not my words. We are the only place in the world that still believes in intuition of science. We put money on the intuition of these scientists. And I think that that's the big difference between us and the others. And that's why I'm hopeful about Europe. But for that, we have to invest more. But then they also say 2 other things that are a little bit more difficult. One is about innovation. And that comes to Marco's point on the ecosystem. The ecosystem of innovation is not working properly. So we give all the freedom to scientists to create and have all these amazing ideas, get to be Nobel Prizes. But on the innovation, the ecosystem seems to be failing because we are totally top-down and we're not bottom-up. And so the Lamy report says you have to change the way you finance innovation. You cannot do it by discipline. You cannot do it by country. You have to do it really from bottom-up. And I think that's a message that I really wanted to share with you because it's important for our discussion. Then I think that the other message that comes in line with the Clergeau report is about this idea of the missions. And I think that somehow in Europe we lost that. We lost this link in between the citizens and science. You know, when I see that NASA announces 2 months ago that they had discovered 7 new planets, I was astonished because I know the work we're doing on it. And finally, I came to know that that was a Belgian scientist. It was Michael Gillen in the University of Liège. But NASA was announcing it in the United States because Michael Gillen didn't have a telescope and he rented a telescope to NASA. But it was our discovery. It was the money of the European Research Council, was a Belgian scientist that was very smart because he called to the project Speculoos, and the Americans didn't notice. But I think that it's a sign that we have to be more vocal and that we have to create these missions that give people and get them to be proud of being Europeans. And so I just wanted to tell you that on that note, I think that the regions are the link in between that and the people, because we cannot do it at the level sometimes of the Union. We cannot do it at the level of the countries, but we have to do it in these communities of practice that Marco Marcula defines so well. So you have really a finger on the pulse of the citizens in each of your regions. You know people better than we do, and this gives you an insight that's invaluable to me and my colleagues. And it means that we have to work in terms of the FP9 in ways of you participating more in terms of the design of these instruments. And so I really look forward to continuing our discussion. The report of Mr. Clergeau will provide invaluable input in order to really, in the words of Lamy Group, make regions innovation laboratories of change. I think that you are the laboratories of change of the future, and I'm very happy to be here and share my ideas with you. And congratulations to Mr. Clergeau and to the President for inviting me here. Thank you.